Okay, so now we're going to hear from Gilda Deserti, who's the founder and CEO of Pharma Quality Europe. She graduated with a degree in economic statistics from the University of Bocconi in Milan, Italy, has worked extensively in the field of information technology and specifically IT compliance on both a national and international level for companies such as Siemens and Edicon. Globally recognized as an international expert in the field of computer system validation. She has provided war room support and strategic consultancy for clients to comply with FDA and other regulatory bodies during inspections. So with that, Gilda.
Okay, so this is good morning to everybody, and thank you for having me here to FDA News Organization. It's always a pleasure to come to this event. It is not the first time I'm coming and speak in these occasions, and I'm always very surprised how different the world is in the US from the rest of the world, in a sense. So it's always an opportunity for me to see something different, let's say, in this field, and I hope for you to see what's going on in the rest of the world, let's say. Also because for what we have heard until now, actually this big revolution that is going on in the organization of the FDA maybe will go in the direction of creating an inspections team which will be more similar, closer to what the rest of the world has experienced until now. Okay, so as you have seen from my biography, I'm one of these humble IT guys, okay, that have been mentioned many times during this morning. So my presentation will be, let's say, in the first part, I will try to create, let's say, the framework, the legal and new guidance frameworks about the inspection. But in the second part, what I'm interested in sharing with you some real-life experience. Okay, why? Because together with the people in my company, we are 400 people, and we are moving through inspection, both FDA and all the other regulatory bodies once per week. Okay, so I can share really some real experience. And in the end, I will share with you my conclusion. Okay, so what's going on? If you don't mind, I take the mic because I like to move. So. It works? Okay, fantastic. So, what's going on in the present century? Three main, let's say, leading stream. The first one is the creation of the global coalition. Okay, so especially the PICS organization is really the one organization putting together all the countries, and more in the rest of the world there is this initiative going on for participating, and as you know, since 2011 FDA is participating. For sure, fighting counterfeit and relying on data. The subject of data integrity, specifically quality control laboratory and production, is becoming a central one, and I will concentrate my real case example on this. Okay, so what is data integrity? In short, is to assure that the data are consistent, accurate, reliable, and accessible. And all over the world, there is an acronym which went around for some times, which is ALCOA. So the data have to be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate. My assessment of the situation is that this ALCOA model will really change our way of doing not only validation, but presenting our company and assuring the control, the status of the control. Okay, so in the last, let's say, 12 months, there has been really an explosion of new guidance issued by the most important association and regulatory bodies, such as MHRA, WHO, OECD, FDA, and PICS. Some of these, like the one from FDA, PICS, and the last MHRA, which is this summer, are still draft, but they will be for sure issued, and we will have some insight on these. But the important part is that such an explosion, as I say, a kind of big bang of new guidance never happened before in the story. So this has to tell you something. Okay, so speaking of the global coalitions, I think that something that will change, and is changing completely the pharma arena and the arena of the inspection, is really the PICS initiative and the fact that big rest of the world countries are in the process of entering the PICS organization. I personally had the honor, let's say, of rewriting the section related to data integrity of the new GMP in Mexico. Brazil is starting the process, and all these people in big countries are trained by FDA inspectors, are sharing inspection with the EU inspector, FDA inspector. So this will really change the environment and the global situation all over the world. So more and more initiative of joint inspection, initiative of inspection delegated to other countries will become, let's say, common practice under common standards such as the ICH quality guidance. Okay, but don't forget what are the regulations that still remains, the major regulation remains Part 11, 97, and Annex 11, which is 2011. Of course, I am speaking of computerized system validation. One thing is to speak about the guidance. Another thing is to remember what are the regulations. These are the regulations. The main difference is related to the, let's say, the focus on electronic records. Part 11 is focalized on electronic records. The Annex 11 is more a systemic, let's say, rule. But at the end of the day, you see in this slide that the area with dotted red point is very big. So at the heart, they are very similar. And at the end of the day, since FDA participated in PICS, as I said, actually they are enforcing requirements which are only in the Annex 11 because of PICS, not because they are in Part 11. The typical case is the audit tray review. The audit tray review is a requirement of the Annex 11, but is asked also by the FDA inspectors. Okay, so some slide about FDA. So FDA is concentrating on data integrity. Actually, data integrity audit is one of the objectives, for example, of this chapter guidance. And how do the FDA inspectors behave, let's say, all over the world? Generally speaking, there is a different, let's say, behavior, because they are, as Mr. Avelan said yesterday, law enforcement officer at the end of the day. So at heart, they are looking for fraud. And the attitude is a little bit that you are guilty until proven innocent. But what I have to say is that in the last, let's say, couple of years, more and more the FDA inspector are extremely expert, okay? So the people coming to Europe, the people going to India and China, where we are following many inspections, are really IT expert, okay? So they can go in front of a lab system, they can go in front of a production system, and they can navigate inside the system better than you can do. Okay, so this is really something different. So when I started doing this work back in the 90s, the inspectors stayed in a room asking for paper, etc. Now they are going to the lab, going in production, and in front of the machine, moving around. Okay, so I just mentioned this recent case of warning letter related to production control system, because the level of the bar has been raised to a level that, as you see, this warning letter is related to production system PLC based, okay? sometimes when I do assessment in the FDA, I have to discuss still with people, managers that say, this is a PLC system based, so it is not a computerized systems, okay? Why all around the world, FDA is asking for access control, audit trail, etc., also in this type of system. So there is a big difference in between the perception and what actually the level of control of requirement of FDA. Okay, in April this year, after more than 10 years, because the last guidance related to data integrity, as you remember, was 2003, there was the issues of these data integrity and compliance with CGMP, still a draft, which, let's say, underline some important topics such as ALCOA, the difference between static and dynamics, audit trail review, and third-party assessment. So, as I was mentioning, audit trail review, third-party assessment are not something inside the Part 11, but of course, they have been included because of the PICS initiatives in this guidance. Okay, so I call your attention on this concept because this is really a fundamental context for understanding and assessing your situation. Because the difference between static and dynamic means that a static record format, in principle, can be transformed in a report, in a PDF format, can be managed on paper, okay? While all the dynamic record, the one that have a need to be reprocessed, of course, cannot, okay? So this could be a good, let's say, way for assessing your situation. Okay, some other hints which are interesting enough. So the fact that you cannot exclude the data, okay? So sometimes I go in company and especially in production, they say, okay, we do everything on paper, okay? So we disqualify the electronic data produced by the production machine, okay? This is not possible because you have to have a valid documented scientific justification for doing this, okay? The fact that there is no scientific basis for disqualify the electronic record produced by a production machine shows to you that the only really valid way is to have the electronic system validated and up to the requirement, and then if you want to follow up using the paper, it's up to you. Okay, second point is related to validation and to the intended use. Which is the final reason why we validate a system. So every, let's say, GXP function and process flow has to be validated as per the intended use. This means that you have to have requirement with these process flows, of course. And the last point, which is one of the more controversial, because there is a very strong statement by FDA recommending that audit trail that capture changes to critical data be reviewed with each record before final approval of the record. So this means audit trail review for each batch released by your company, which is a huge, terrible work to perform, okay? In this, for example, the MHRA guidance is a lot more lenient because accept a statistical approach. Okay, so let's move to the EU. The EU is a big harlequin, let's say, of a situation in terms of regulatory inspection. More so, in a sense, after the Brexit, because many inspectorates are moving for, let's say, in the hope of being the next country who will foster, let's say, the EMA organization. So there are big changes in the way of inspection. We have seen really in the last 3-4 months a change of paces in many regulatory bodies. Of course, the differences are due to state or national level, and I wanted to underline that one of the biggest differences up to now has been the fact that in some countries, for example, like Germany, the inspectors are local inspectors because it is a federal government, While in other countries like France, Italy, there are centralized inspectors, so they are not coming from the region. Okay. What is the difference? That actually, if you have a centralized inspection, the inspections are a lot more serious. Okay, why? Because there is, let's say, a relations that you create with the inspectors that also, when it is in the good way, if you are inspected always by the same people, of course, you start to become friends. If they come from your same region, maybe they have studied in the same university. So it is created a kind of, let's say, professional friendships that, of course, change completely the tone of the inspections. So in Europe, the country who have centralized inspectors have inspections that are tougher than in other countries. But the situation is fastly changing. And because now we are moving to a system of shared EU inspectors teams. And the other big change in the European world is that the inspection results are starting to be published. Okay, so nowadays in the EUDRA GMDP, which is the database of the European Community, you have, as you see in the third line, statement of non-compliance with GMP, which actually are the equivalent of warning letter. Okay, this is something. This is a real revolution in the European world because the privacy laws in Europe have been always extremely tough. I was in a congress, in a ISP congress a few months ago, and there was a workshop with the case studies speaking of visual control of the people in production, okay? Something like this, to have camera filming people working in production in country like mine, for example, which is Italy, would be unthinkable, okay? So this really show to you what a big step has been to make public the, let's say, report of the inspection. So this is another proof of how the world is becoming more and more globalized. Okay, so what is the main reference in this moment in Europe is this guidance by MHRA. It was published in March 2015 and already reviewed 3 times. This is the draft from July 2016. So I think that the major point in this, which is, I wanted to call your attention, is the concept of creating an organizational culture, okay? So quality, data integrity is, first of all, a problem of culture. If you don't change the culture of the company, you will find yourself like many companies I know that have spent a fortune in remediating, for example, after 483, after warning letter, and 2 years after the remediation, the situation went back to the same, okay? Because the culture of the company, the culture of data integrity was not there. Keep in mind that it has been said many times in these hours, there are countries where the fact of losing face in front of your boss is unthinkable, okay? Of course, if you have a situation like this and you don't let's say the management does not do something for empowering the people in order to raise their hand when they make mistakes, etc., of course, nothing will change ever. So first of all, organizational culture, and the other important aspect is the aspect of risk. Risk management. So the effort has to be always commensurate to risk, and actually let's say the foundation of ICH Q9 related to risk management has to be always present in all analysis related to data integrity. Okay, so first of all, the first step foreseen in this guidance is related to data governance that has to be preventive and, of course, also detecting the situation and periodically monitoring. And of course, the responsibility of senior management. All data integrity regards responsibility and ownership, accountability of what's going on. Okay, very important also this aspect, the audit trail and the audit trail review, we have already mentioned in the MHRA guidance, it is accepted to have, let's say, a statistical approach based on the impact or risk. And very interesting what is in red in the bottom part of this slide, because MHRA says that, and it was already in the approved guidance, that if you still have an hybrid system with respect to the audit trail, and this system cannot be proved equivalent to a completely automated system, it has to be remediated by the end of 2017. Okay, so 2017 is a date very, very close. To, let's say, to have a paper system equivalent to electronic is something, let's say, that if in theory possible, would require such effort that for sure it's better to have a change in the system. Okay, so I will finish with this one, which is in a sense my favorite. Why? Because WHO is something that also in the Third World War everyone is following. Also in Africa they are following WHO, in South America, so it's a very, very important reference. So another time Alcoa, as you see, this Alcoa is really a tantrum, let's say, something repeated and repeated. And this aspect about data governance, contract givers and contract acceptors, because the accountability on the company doesn't stop in the plant, but it goes to all the subject related with the life cycle of the supply chain. And one point I want to call your attention, which is very interesting in this guidance, is that there are provisions for paper and electronic related to the same aspect of data integrity. So if you want some advice about how to check your system, how to check if your paper approach in some cases is sound enough, goes to this WHO guidance, and you will find a lot of advice. Okay, so I hope to have proved to you that Alcoa is there. Is the response really to any inspection, let's say, with respect to data integrity. So my advice in this moment is that you try to make an analysis as soon as possible of how to trace the aspect of Alcoa and Alcoa Plus to the compliance requirement, and check, based on this checklist, the situation of your systems. Okay, so let's end up with the theory and move to some real case example. And this is the first one. I used this format in the sense that this is something, let's say, in the snapshot on the right, you have really what the inspector will see, let's say, will look in your computer. And I have a few slides with such very, very common cases, okay? So the first two are related to data integrity. This one regards the fact that the system didn't have protection within the operating system. So the data, for example, this is the example of a gas chromatographer, could be saved on the local workstation. And of course, in this way, they could be deleted without any control by the system. This other case is the same, so, but it's worse in the sense that inside the software, there was a function allowing to browse, so to go to Windows, and also a delete button. Okay, so this means clearly something that could not go in this way. Data and time protection, so data and time not protected. it was possible to change the clock, and this, remember, that is something often asked by FDA inspector also for small equipment, okay? Very recently, we were in an inspection where there were 43 raised because the small scales connected in the lab had the function of changing time and date, okay? And this was not controlled. So the clock protection is something very relevant. Audit trail, the audit trail not active, not available, not fully compliant, or not tracking because the configuration was not there, okay? There are very important system, very well, let's say, supported from a data integrity Part 11 point of view. I make a case with the name. The case is Empower, for example, that everybody knows. It's one of the most common chromatographic system software in the lab. Empower has a function that allows you to configure to the detail of the audit trail. So, real case, one pharma company where the audit trail was there, was well validated, etc. Unfortunately, the inspector went to the audit trail configuration and the delete parameter was switched off. Okay, so the audit trail traced everything but the deleting of data inside the system. Okay, so let's say these are real cases, and you have to take responsibility. I end with two more about user access restriction. Of course, there are secondary features like the password aging, the minimum length, but more important things like the fact of user group and privileges. Okay. So the user administrator didn't have the appropriate rights, and these other cases where a password and the login were shared among same users. I used this format also for another reason, because I wanted to share with you the fact that this is the way of preparing a good validation documentation, okay? Too many times there is a kind of, let's say, separation in between validation documentation, which apparently is made just for the sake of doing paperwork, and the real concept of quality control and inspection preparation, okay? So, if inside your protocol for each, for example, data integrity test, you have evidence like this one, where it is evidenced that the system comply, okay, both when the quality assurance review the validation or when an inspector review the validation, you can demonstrate actually showing something which is really an evidence that the system worked. Okay, so my advice is let's try as much as possible to have not a nice written actual result where I say, okay, the system complied, the audit trail is okay. Okay, this is absolutely worse than having a good printout evidence, a snapshot evidence of the system really working, the configuration of the system really working with the date and the time, okay? So try to create documental evidence of what you have tested, okay? Because actually, as we said, the inspector will go there and look at the system, not look at the paper. So if he looks at your validation documentation, seeing these can be a support. Okay, so I end with some real case of inspection. Just for this is, let's say, a real conversation that happened with the real inspector. This was a medical device company. So the inspector stated that whatever you have in the plant must be validated. This means process, system, test method, software, and even a single tiny Excel file that you use. So don't forget the Excel files. In many cases, also the Excel files supporting, let's say, for example, calibration, supporting calculation in calibration. Interesting, the second point, even if you state that you have a paper-based system in presence of a software that your operator use to speed up the software has to be validated. And of course, go ahead, validate that your software retains information. So the only way actually for disqualified data is that the system does not maintain in a permanent way electronic GMP data. Okay, this is another case, the famous and famous waste bin. So the inspector looked in the physical waste bin and then in the PC waste bin, so and found any type of documentation. This is something else. The fact that the inspector asked, for example, in this case, the analyst to go through the system, and he confirmed that the system was well configured, but when using the function Ctrl-D, it was possible to delete data. Also, if the system did not have the function of deleting. Okay, this is another real case. Trying to change the system time, and also looking in the email for communication requests about unofficial data, printout deletion, and request of doing some operation which was not consistent with GMP. Okay, so this case is during the inspection, the inspector reviewed the physical security system. It was the access control system for a stability cell. And the system was not properly implemented and validated. So the inspector asked the list of users and relevant permissions, discovering that any plant guest had the permission to access the rooms and remained in active, let's say, also when left the plant. I think that this could be also used in when you have to remediate a 483 that supporting, for example, the case that you don't have an audit trail. There is a famous enough warning letter, recent warning letter related to the fact that the inspector didn't accept the use of a log file instead of an audit trail. Why they didn't use they didn't accept the answer that a log file existed? Because the log file was not enough, not having, due to the fact that the production machine shared the same user. Okay, but if the log file would have been supported by an access system to the room, by the training record of the people, of course, you create a defense line, you create a rationale that is a lot more supported. Okay, system administrator rights, there are plenty of these, so keep in mind to check not to have role incompatibility, so that typically the laboratory system administrator must be someone outside the quality control. And also the last one is a real case, all these are real case, which is not so common, but it was not accepted that the supervisor role had also the permission of an analyst, okay? What the inspector asked was that if the supervisor had, for example, to do method validation, so he had to perform the function of an analyst, he had to have another login and another password in order to recognize what was the accountability of the operation and for the same person. Okay, data integrity. This is super recent case during an inspection. This was an inspection by actually the Italian Ministry of Health. In the lab, in the PC of one analyst, there was a folder named trial testing. Okay, the FDA inspector checked more PC, and almost everybody had this trial testing folder. So the inspector asked to download immediately in a portable hard disk the content of the full machines of all the analysts, and they kept it and analyzed later all the data, discovering that, of course, the trial testing were testing where it was, let's say, checked, and the analysis, the result was not good enough. It was repeated until the good one who was put in the system. Okay. Are the last two. One, qualification laboratory system failed to appropriately address data integrity consideration, so deletion of data and also the inability of retrieving the data during the inspection. Don't forget the problem of data retrieval, especially for data which are maintained based on long-term archiving. The system setting for the two computer, this is really the last one. So the function save all analysis result was disabled, okay? This is similar of the case of Empower that I mentioned before. So having disabled this function, of course, only the last analysis remained in the system. All the previous one could be deleted. And also the use of annotation tool, which is very risky, especially chromatographic system, because the annotation can cover some result that you don't want to show, was not disabled. Okay, so this is just for giving you an idea of the level of detail and also the level of competence of the inspectors performing the inspection, because as I said, these are all real life cases. So this means your validation has to reach this level of accuracy, and let's say the people presenting the case have to show this level of competence. Okay, so this is our final conclusion. It's not a matter of technology. More and more, it is clear to me that technology is the last of the problem. Let's say pharma company has to envisage for ensuring data integrity. Technology and automation is the only way that can guarantee a full data integrity compliance. And if you don't want to make frauds, it's the easiest and cheapest way. Important that there are many different data sources that have to be kept under consideration in order to make the risk assessment we have mentioned before related to which are really the electronic records. Remember the definition of Part 11. Electronic records are the one under predicate rules. Okay, so of course, in a production machine, you have hundreds of parameters. Okay, what you are asked to maintain in this way are the one critical to quality for the process you are following. Okay, so most of this information, for example, comes from the process validation. If you don't create a logical link in between your method validation and process validation and your computer system validation, the risk is or either you don't do enough or you do too much. Many cases you do too much. Good. So for ensuring reliability, first thing is to identify the regulated records. As you may imagine, most of my time is dedicated to auditing and assessment, mock inspection. So I'm always surprised how few companies inside their validation exercise, they don't have a definition of which are the GMP electronic record managed by the system. Okay, so you have a nice validation, tons of pages, but you don't have the testing of the electronic records managed by the system because you don't have defined them. So very important definition of electronic records. And then to understand what is the data life cycle, either on paper or if you do a fully electronic system or if you have an hybrid management. So this is the logical flow. Identification of electronic record, following up the data life cycle of the electronic record, and checking if it's paper, computer, or hybrid. Okay, so this moves through the fact that you have to have this data life cycle and a matrix like the one in the right part of the slide, which for each electronic record, for each step of the data life cycle, you have to check if and where, let's say, you have the compliance with the ALCOA. So, for example, if we speak about original data, you have to check for each data, which is critical to quality, for example, if it is actually the original is electronic, if it's on paper, and if you don't want to use the electronic, how you do, if you have a paper system good enough for checking that you cover all the aspects that would in theory be covered by the electronic. Okay, this is the last one. So I always like very much this Abraham Lincoln sentence that if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I spend the first 4 sharpening the axe, which means, first of all, think to a good plan. It's not acceptable in this moment to have a company not having a data integrity plan with a timeline, with action, a logical flow of action. So, first of all, to have a good plan, and then the easiest part is to move forward. Thank you. Some questions. I think we are all hungry, but we have 2 minutes.
Hi, great presentation. And I have a question about dynamic data that you mentioned earlier, and that you showed a slide with a chromatograph. What's the current thinking in terms of retaining a printed copy of the chromatograph and the electronic version of the file from the equipment?
Okay, so for dynamic data, there is no discussion. You have to keep the electronic, okay? Why? Because the paper copy is never a true copy, okay? In the sense that cannot have all the metadata needed for the reprocessing, okay? So the approach is, if you want to keep the paper, maybe for the sake of the signature, because your system is hybrid in the sense that you sign on paper, but you keep the electronic as a source data, it's fine, okay? But the paper can never be the equivalent. This works, for example, for chromatographic data. The typical dynamic data are chromatographic data and trend data. So for all the system where you have to make trends, they are considered electronic dynamic data. Of course, the question is a lot larger, because what are the data? Are you sure that, for example, also a very simple system like a blender, okay, in case of an auto specification or in case of investigation, okay, you don't have to go back to the electronic, okay? So for sure, whatever, let's say, in many cases in production, we have someone looking at the system and writing down something that goes in the batch record, okay? Why the system keep all the electronic, okay? So this is clearly not good enough, so.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry for my terrible voice, but I wanted to clarify in terms of the EMA and the local legislations in Europe. From what you were saying, that the inspections could be done either by local or state.
Yes.
And
local or state in the sense of the team of inspectors.
The team, okay. So you're saying that the team is not necessarily made up of all the EMA representatives. And secondly, I wanted to go further and to understand, are the authorizations for marketing authorizations, are they strictly from EMA, or are some of them still being given at the local? Okay,
so up to now the EMA inspection have been very few, okay? They are becoming more, let's say, more frequent, but due to the fact that the law in Europe works that the EMA issue, let's say, the GMP, the General European GMP, but each national country has to adopt as a national law, okay? The certificate, the authorization to production is issued by the country, okay, not by EMA, okay? So the registration can be centralized based on its process, but the certificate to production is issued locally, okay? So I was speaking about the inspector because it was, if you have heard the presentation this morning, they were speaking about having inspectors not coming from the district, but globally selected, okay? Which is something similar to to the situation I was describing in Europe. In countries like Germany, for example, where you have the regional inspectors, the inspection in the end for many years have resulted a lot more lenient than in other countries where there was a centralized team of inspectors. So it was a mention not to the registration and authorization to manufacturing, but to the way of inspecting.
We have one quick one.
This is not a question, it's just a comment. From being in Australia, we have to comply with everybody, and it's not from a GMP perspective that I'm talking, it's from a clinical trial drug registration. And might I say, we get inspected when we have high recruitment into studies by the FDA, by the EMA, and by our TGA. FDA are very solid in their inspections. The EMA, I have to congratulate you by being our group's QA manager, take it to a whole another level, and are very forensic and are very discriminatory in their inspections. And we continue to improve when we have an EMA inspection. So what you're doing is good and appreciated, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's great to get a compliment like that. That's really a positive. Thank you very much, Gilda. It was delightful. I think everybody benefited from the insight that Gilda shared on data integrity, and certainly the growing importance in the international and harmonized communities of data integrity and the importance of getting it right. These are clearly issues that the agencies, all the regulatory bodies are going to be focusing on, and they're going to be looking forward for those deviations. They're not necessarily gotchas. It's really, is the data there? Is the integrity of that data there to assure safe and effective products? So with that, we're going to take a lunch break.